The healing world today, therapy, coaching, spirituality, psychedelics, wellness content, is not one field. It is not clinical, it's not regulated, and it's not cohesive. It's a social, cultural, economic, and aesthetic ecosystem. And because it pulls from so many different lineages, psychology, somatics, Eastern traditions, indigenous practices, digital branding, identity work, no single discipline actually has the full map. Therapists see one slice, coaches another, spiritual communities another, sociologists another, even economists another. But the space itself is hybrid. Markets, meaning-making, identity performance, aesthetics, and informal authority all interact at once. I haven't seen anyone map the whole space holistically, partly because the incentives aren't there and partly because very few people move across all these domains without fully belonging to any of them. But that's the position I am speaking from. I am trained as an economist, so I tend to look at incentives, structures, and systems. And as a nomad, I haven't just moved geographically, I have moved across subcultures. I have spent time in wellness spaces, nightlife scenes, nomadic hubs, yoga circles, underground and psychedelic adjacent communities, not as a member, but as an observer. Being globally mobile, I've watched the same archetypes and the same frameworks replicate across places: Tulum, Ibiza, Bali, Miami, parts of India, often in surprisingly similar ways. And I'm not selling anything in this space, which gives me a clean vantage point. So what I'm offering here is not advice and not doctrine, it's cultural analysis. If you're new here, I am Noemi, and this is a Renaissance Nomad, a project that's slowly becoming a space for people who move through systems, structures, and selves and want a way to make sense of them. My work here tries to map the deeper patterns shaping how individuals and groups manage inner experience in a high complexity world. This essay, or video essay, is a map of the healing industry as it currently exists, and in many ways it's a pre-AI snapshot. The landscape is already shifting, especially as emotionally supportive AI becomes normalized. Anthropic recently released a video touching on this, and many of the ethical concerns people raise about AI actually apply to this industry long before AI enters the picture, around themes such as influence, authority, vulnerability, dependence, and the blurring of care with commerce. So this is a contextualization. I'm trying to speak with objectivity rather than group allegiance. I do apply a critical lens because I have opinions and I've seen enough to form them, but the aim is not cynicism and not judgment. It is hopefully clarity and grounded discernment. Before we go deeper into the landscape, I want to briefly name the 4 forces that make the modern healing space feel so confusing. Therapy language becoming mass culture. Terms like trauma, boundaries, attachment, and nervous system regulation now circulate widely, but without shared definitions or context. Spirituality merging with content creation. Aestheticized spirituality spreads through reels, retreats, and influencer language, mixing sincerity with performance. Psychedelics becoming mainstream without integration. Peak experiences are increasingly normalized, but often without the cultural, ethical, or communal frameworks that once held them. Multiple lineages blending without coherence. People mix Eastern philosophies, somatics, mysticism, psychology, and coaching frameworks, creating variety but also conceptual confusion. These forces overlap, creating a space that is rich, open, but often internally incoherent, and that's the terrain I want to map. I also want to add that none of this is clinical advice, and I'm not speaking as a therapist. This is my own synthesis, a sociological map drawn from observation and lived experience across multiple worlds. And to be clear, when I reference scholars or frameworks, I'm using them as signposts rather than offering full academic summaries. The analysis itself is my own, It's a synthesis of observation, field experience, and high-level theory. Beneath the confusion, there's a larger structural reality. Healing today isn't one thing, it's an industry. And like any industry, it has layers, incentives, and internal competition. What we call the healing space today is not a unified field. It's a fragmented industry pulling from multiple lineages and monetization models. Psychotherapy, clinical, often insurance-based, slow, coaching, unregulated, fast, entrepreneurial, spiritual facilitation, ceremony, energy work, mysticism, wellness content, apps, courses, Instagram reels, psychedelics, retreats, microdosing, therapeutic protocols. These spaces don't just coexist, they overlap, borrow from each other, and often compete for authority. So when people move through them, they can end up mixing frameworks that don't really fit together, layering incompatible worldviews, and sometimes chasing transformation without fully anchoring. Therapy today is widely plural. Cognitive behavioral therapy reframes thought patterns. Internal family systems speaks in the language of parts and protectors. Somatic therapies focus on sensation and nervous system regulation. Psychoanalysis look toward the past and the unconscious. These modalities don't just differ in technique, they disagree, often quietly, on what healing means and even on what the self is. And most don't directly engage with existential or spiritual questions, even though many clients arrive with exactly those themes. In many ways, therapy has stepped into a cultural gap. School doesn't teach emotional literacy. Family often transmit unresolved patterns. Religion no longer offers a shared framework. So therapy becomes the default, not because it's complete, but because it's available. Sociologist Eva Illouz notes that therapeutic discourse increasingly shapes how we understand ourselves, emotions as things to manage, relationships as projects, and healing as a looping form of self-improvement. In that sense, therapy reorganizes our emotional lives in the image of the culture we already inhabit, often mirroring the same logics of optimization, productivity, and personal responsibility that contributed to our distress in the first place. This dynamic is especially visible in secular, urban, Western contexts, particularly in the US, where therapy isn't just accepted, it's expected. If therapy is fragmented, coaching is even more so. Unregulated, fast-moving, and entrepreneurial by design. Over the past decade, a wider range of figures have emerged under the coaching umbrella. Life coaches, trauma-informed facilitators, embodiment guides, business mentors, sacred sexuality teachers. Some offer real value, others operate in gray areas, blending personal story, borrowed frameworks, and branding into packages of transformation. Coaching draws from therapy, spirituality, business consulting, and digital marketing, often without naming its sources or acknowledging its limits. There's no shared credential, no widely agreed code of ethics, so authority is generally signaled through aesthetics, presence, and platform, rather than training or peer review. In many cases, emotional vulnerability becomes a marketing asset, trauma becomes a niche, and the self becomes a brand. This isn't necessarily malicious. For many, coaching is a way to survive and serve, a vehicle to share what they have learned, to create autonomy in a precarious economy. But the result is a blurry, sometimes incoherent field. Healing, mentorship, and market all collapsed into one offering. Not everyone calls what they do coaching, but many operate in that model. One-on-one containers, tiered programs, course launches. The packaging varies, but the structure remains strikingly similar. Sometimes coaching attracts people who are still trying to make sense of their own experience. So it's a path taken not from mastery but from confusion. In places like Tulum or Ubud, it's not uncommon to meet people who have undergone abrupt, unintegrated, let's call them awakenings, that is, experiences that feel profound but haven't been fully processed or were simply adrift, and who quickly reinvent themselves as yoga teachers, facilitators, or some category of coach. Often their authority stems less from experience than from aesthetics, charisma, or a spiritual encounter they haven't yet metabolized. In the absence of strong mentoring or institutional grounding, coaching can become a kind of recursive loop. People lost in their own journeys, guiding others through similar terrain. At its worst, this dynamic morphs into a pyramid scheme of self-help, where the primary product being sold is the dream of becoming a coach oneself. And what's sometimes being sold isn't just support or accountability, it's initiation. As one academic study calls it, this is spiritual life coaching, a hybrid of spiritual messaging, self-help rhetoric, and digital entrepreneurship. So yes, that's a real term. The paper is titled Galactic Transmissions from Tantra Bros, Priestesses, red-pilled starseeds, and ayahuasca girls, decoding the pedagogies of spiritual life coaching. And I would probably have to censor one word because YouTube would definitely not love it. But this brings us to the next layer. Spirituality as identity and aesthetic. In today's wellness and self-development culture, spirituality has become both a source of meaning and a style. But what does spiritual mean? I find the word confusing even for myself, especially because I'm sometimes labeled or defaulted to spiritual or one of those spiritual girls, and asked about astrology or other things I don't really follow. Got to a point where I didn't know how to describe my position at all, and I guess it is what I now describe loosely as a kind of agnostic mysticism, which is more of a stance of openness than an identity. In theory, Illas and Hudad describe the spiritual revolution as the rise of subjective life spirituality, a move away from religious authority and toward the personal meaning-making, emotional authenticity, and inner alignment. In practice, spiritual today functions more as a floating signifier. It holds emotional or symbolic weight, but its meaning shifts wildly depending on who's using it, where and why. This practical ambiguity is part of what makes spirituality so adaptable. It is inclusive, everyone can access it, marketable, you can brand almost anything as spiritual, and confusing, no shared frame, no agreed upon goals. Academic studies like those by Hillas or York try to classify this, but on the ground, in my experience, what we are witnessing is that spiritual can mean somatic awareness, cosmic downloads, a connection to nature, trauma healing, morning rituals, or aesthetic curation, and sometimes all of these at once, or something else entirely. To me, this feels more sociological than the theorists because it tries to map lived usage and not just doctrine. And you'll see this play out in quotes about alignment and high vibes living, in coaches or communities speaking in the language of quantum fields, energy codes, masculine, feminine polarity, womb healing, inner child reparenting, astrology, and human design. You can add in manifestation talk, Sedona retreats, and trusting the universe. Intuition, ceremony, and trauma discourse all blend into a new hybrid. Spiritual, psychological, feminine coded, and often brandable. Some of it is sincere, some of it is survival, but a lot of it is performance, an identity to inhabit, signal, and eventually monetize. Spirituality has moved from inquiry to identity, from mysticism to marketing. Think white linen, temple kitchen interiors, desert retreats, softly filtered reels with bowls of cacao. Authority is increasingly measured by visual polish and energetic resonance, and depth competes with visibility. While many of these ideas draw from ancient traditions, Eastern philosophies, indigenous cosmologies, mysticism, they're often stripped of lineage, ethics, or context. And this isn't just a Western issue. Especially as a nomad, I've seen how these frameworks travel and what gets lost in translation. What may begin as sincere inner work in one setting often arrives elsewhere as lifestyle branding, spiritual materialism, or even a subtle kind of therapeutic colonialism, even if this word might be a bit strong. From manifestation rhetoric replacing systemic understanding to westernized yoga reshaping local traditions, this discourse doesn't just spread, it can, even if unintentionally, displace. That too is part of the landscape. Scholars such as Michael York and Paul Hillis describe this trend as the spiritual supermarket, where wellness seekers mix elements of yoga, astrology, tantra, and breathwork into eclectic, consumer-driven practices. Fieldwork in India shows how yoga retreats have evolved into commodified spiritual tourism, repackaging lineage and mysticism for a Western audience, often reinforcing subtle hierarchies of cultural power. Again, the point here isn't cynicism, it's discernment. We're not just watching new tools emerge, we are watching new identities and industries take shape. That deserves our attention, because identity formation today is happening as much through aesthetics as through belief. If spirituality has become identity and style, wellness content is how it often gets packaged and sold. From meditation apps and affirmation podcasts to Instagram reels on energetic hygiene or courses on inner child healing, today's wellness landscape is increasingly digitized, bite-sized, and product-sized. Platforms like Mindvalley, Insight Timer, and Gaia have turned once niche ideas into scalable markets. This content often borrows language from therapy, coaching, and mysticism, blending them into motivational templates optimized for reach. Regulate your nervous system in 7 days. Master your vibration. Unlock your soul contract. And increasingly, it's not just about healing, it's about self-design. Digital wellness products promise transformation without the messiness of the process. Content you can consume, bookmark, or like without ever needing to be held, seen, or challenged. Some of it is useful, some of it is lightweight or at times sadly manipulative, but nearly all of it is a performance of intimacy at scale. And because these products are digital, they move fast, reshaping language, expectations, and norms around what healing should look and feel like. Digital platforms reward speed, repetition, and emotional resonance, not nuance. So the content evolves rapidly while rarely deepening. This acceleration shapes expectations across the entire healing ecosystem, including how people approach deeper or riskier modalities. Psychedelics are powerful technologies of consciousness. In the right setting, they can unearth buried material, dissolve egoic boundaries, or open access to deeply embodied insight. In today's healing economy, their visibility has grown, but collective understanding of their potency, risks, and long-term consequences remain elusive. In some circles, psychedelics are framed as tools for personal growth, productivity, or neurohacking. Microdosing routines circulate in tech spaces, ketamine clinics appear in urban wellness hubs, ayahuasca retreats are marketed with sleek branding and promise transformation. This growing interest coexists with persistent stigma, legal restrictions, and lack of clinical research. Decades of prohibition have shaped public perception and institutional access, especially for so-called healthy normals, outside the clinical diagnosis. As a result, many people are experimenting with little information and even less support. What was once held within ritual, cosmology, and community is now accessed through radically different means: recreational use, curated retreats, clinical protocols, or DIY spreadsheets. Integration is often an afterthought or bypassed completely. Integration refers to the ongoing process of making sense of psychedelic experiences, emotionally, cognitively, spiritually, and weaving insights into everyday life. Without this, profound revelations risk fading into confusion, overwhelm, or performance. In some wellness and coaching spaces, psychedelics are often treated as accelerators, promising ego death, rapid reprogramming, or quantum shifts. But intensity without containment can overwhelm more than it heals and create dependency on the next breakthrough. Catharsis can be mistaken for healing. Vision can be confused for truth. The peak is emphasized, the descent is neglected. Researchers are beginning to trace these tensions. Nicholas Langlitz wrote of the neuropsychonauts navigating modern labs. Others like Buso and Dos Santos have explored the commercialization of plant medicine. Indigenous thinkers continue to raise concerns about cultural extraction and loss, where sacred practices are rebranded without reciprocity or context. So the challenge is not just access, it's meaning. What does it mean to encounter non-ordinary states in a society that offers little scaffolding for them? That gap, powerful experiences with thin scaffolding, is shaping much of today's healing culture. Before closing, I want to name something briefly again. There are many people mapping parts of this world: therapists, sociologists, anthropologists, media scholars, economists, psychedelic researchers, but each of those maps sits in its own silo. What I am trying to offer here is a more integrated view, a lens that looks at therapy, coaching, psychedelics, spiritual identity, wellness content, aesthetic signals, and even nomadic subcultures as one interconnected ecosystem. It's not definitive, it's a starting point, a way of bringing these scattered pieces into a clearer frame. If you want the long-form written version of this piece or future essays, you can find them on Renaissance Nomad. The link is in the description below. And if this kind of mapping resonates, feel free to subscribe here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Somebody following this religion or that religion or no religion